Welcome to a brand new episode of The Deep Dive. Prepare to challenge everything you thought you knew. We are stripping away the layers of misinformation and pulling back the curtain on the facts that have been buried from the public eye for generations. This isn't just another lecture. It's a high-stakes unpacking of the hidden truths that shape our reality. Are you ready to see what's really going on behind the scenes? Buckle up, because we're going further down the rabbit hole than ever before. The truth is out there, and we're about to find it.
Usually when we look back at human history, we tend to treat it like this giant, chaotic pile of puzzle pieces. You know, you've got your wars over here, treaties over there, maybe a random geopolitical crisis or an economic collapse, and we just try to, cram them all together to make a picture that makes some kind of sense out of all the noise.
Yeah, exactly. It feels highly reactive, right? We tend to view history just as this endless chain of cause and effect, mostly driven by, well, whoever happens to hold power at any given moment, or whichever nation possesses the most leverage.
Right.
That's a very terrestrial, ground-level view of human events.
But what if we've been looking at the puzzle entirely wrong this whole time? What if, instead of a random series of disconnected events, every single piece of human history is actually evidence? Like evidence being submitted in this massive, ongoing, universal courtroom trial.
Oh, yeah. That paradigm shift frames exactly what we are unpacking in today's deep dive.
Right.
We're looking at excerpts from a text called The Universal Court Case, Restoring Divine Sovereignty.
Which is fascinating, by the way.
It really is. It's a document detailing the specific theological framework of Jehovah's Witnesses, and specifically, the New World Translation of the Bible.
And the mission for you, the listener, and for us on this deep dive is to impartially unpack how this specific worldview takes the sheer chaos of the modern world and organizes it. It organizes it into a highly structured narrative about the ultimate right to rule.
Exactly. It's a very specific lens.
And just to lay the groundwork early on, we aren't here to endorse this theology or to take any kind of religious stance. We're simply examining the internal logic of this text to see, how it interprets geopolitics, human suffering, and history.
Right, because the architecture of this belief system is incredibly intricate. I mean, it requires looking at global events through a very specific legal and moral lens.
So if we're looking at human history as a universal court case, every trial has to have an inciting incident, right? Like an initial crime or a lawsuit. How do we get from the world's current turmoil to a courtroom drama?
Well, to find that inciting incident, the text argues you have to go all the way back to the beginning, like literally to the Garden of Eden.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, and in this framework, the events in Eden aren't viewed as just some, simple fable about a magical tree or a talking snake.
Right, it's not just a bedtime story.
Exactly. The text treats this as the precise moment a formal legal challenge was filed against the Creator.
I want to dig into the mechanics of that challenge, actually, because the text points out that this wasn't just about a spirit creature offering Eve a forbidden snack. Like if you look at Genesis chapter 3, verses 4 and 5, this creature tells Eve she could be like God, knowing good and bad.
Yeah, which is a massive statement.
Right. That isn't just temptation. It reads like a highly calculated accusation.
It's the ultimate defamation case, really. Because by telling Eve her eyes would be opened, the implication being introduced to the universe was that God was a liar.
A liar who is intentionally holding back.
Exactly. Withholding independence and enlightenment from his creations. It was a direct, calculated challenge to divine sovereignty. The argument essentially stated, humans don't need divine guidance to thrive. They possess the capacity to successfully rule themselves.
Which introduces a massive legal precedent. And by doing this, the spirit creature earns two very specific titles in this theology, right? Satan, which the text notes literally translates to resistor, and devil, which translates to slanderer.
Yeah, and those aren't just archaic, spooky names here. The text uses them as legal descriptors of his actions in that exact moment.
Like job titles, almost.
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah.
He actively resisted the established authority, and he slandered the character and the motives of the ruler. He fundamentally questioned whether God's way of ruling was just, and honestly, whether humans even needed it.
Okay, if I can visualize this using a modern parallel, it's almost as if Adam and Eve were the very first executives of a brand new corporation, like Humanity Incorporated.
I like that analogy.
Right. And instead of following the founder's business plan, they listened to a corporate raider. So they effectively signed this disastrous binding contract on behalf of all their future employees.
Yeah.
The text references Romans chapter 5, verse 12, to explain that by choosing this so-called independence, Adam and Eve essentially kidnapped the human race into a state of imperfection and death.
That concept of a binding multi-generational contract is it's central to how the text explains the human condition. The consequences of that choice cascaded down through all of human history.
So we're basically stuck with a bad deal.
Exactly. The human race inherited the physiological and moral conditions of that original rebellion.
But wait, if humanity supposedly chose independence back in Eden, we clearly didn't get it. I mean, look at the last few thousand years. We don't exactly look like a liberated, self-governing species.
Not at all.
So if the independence was a lie, what did mankind actually trade its perfection for?
Well, that is the tragic irony at the heart of this entire narrative. The text argues that the independence Satan championed was an absolute illusion.
Total scam.
Yeah, mankind traded perfection for a hidden master. Because Satan's true motive, according to the source material, was never to liberate humans or open their eyes. His motive was to divert worship away from the Creator and toward himself.
So it's a hostile takeover, but one where the new boss sets up a system that makes you think you're working for yourself.
Precisely. And the text provides this really fascinating piece of scriptural evidence to back up how complete that takeover was. It points to the temptation of Jesus in the Gospel of Luke.
Oh, yeah. This part of the source material, Luke chapter 4, verses 5 through 8, really stood out to me. Satan takes Jesus, shows him all the kingdoms of the world in an instant, and offers them to Jesus on one condition. He says, if you fall down and do an act of worship to me.
Right. And the underlying implication of that offer is staggering when you consider the legal framework.
It really is, because if I walked up to you today and, I don't know, offered to give you the Eiffel Tower in exchange for a favor, you'd laugh at me.
I would definitely ask to see the deed.
Exactly. You'd say, you can't give me the Eiffel Tower, you don't own it. But Jesus doesn't dispute Satan's authority to give the kingdoms of the world away. He refuses the condition of worship, of course, but he doesn't challenge the fundamental premise that Satan currently holds the title deed to the world's governments.
And the text leverages that specific exchange to support 1 John chapter 5, verse 19, which states that the whole world is lying in the power of the wicked one.
The whole world.
Yeah. In this theological framework, Satan isn't some mythological figure managing an underground fiery prison with a pitchfork. He is an active, invisible, highly influential force who currently manages the Earth's systems.
I want to push on that for a second, though, because how does an invisible entity practically manage secular governments? Like, I look at Parliament, I look at Wall Street, I look at the United Nations. It doesn't look like a coordinated satanic cult. It just looks like flawed humans making really selfish decisions.
Well, the text argues it doesn't need to look coordinated to serve its purpose. By manipulating the broader political, commercial, and religious systems to foster division, systemic greed, and nationalism, the system inherently serves the usurper's goal.
So the chaos is a feature, not a bug.
Exactly. It keeps humanity fractured, completely dependent on human solutions, and entirely alienated from divine sovereignty. The illusion of self-rule is the very mechanism of his control.
So the human race thinks it's ruling itself. We're trying out different forms of government, democracy, communism, autocracy, but it's actually just rearranging the furniture in a house owned by someone else.
That analogy captures the theology perfectly. The trial is ongoing, and humanity is basically exhausting every possible combination of self-governance.
Okay, so how does this ancient, invisible legal battle explain the specific televised chaos of our modern era? Because the source material doesn't just leave this in the realm of ancient history, right? It points to a very specific date where the stakes of this trial radically escalated.
Yes, it does. The text introduces the year 1914 as the crucial pivot point in this theology.
Wait, 1914, that's incredibly specific. I mean, most people look at 1914 and just see the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand and the start of World War I. How does this text connect a political assassination in Sarajevo to a universal courtroom drama?
Well, the theology arrives at 1914 through a pretty complex interpretation of biblical chronology, specifically tied to prophecies in the book of Daniel. But the key event they point to isn't on earth. It's an invisible event described in Revelation chapter 12, verses 7 through 12.
The war in heaven.
Exactly. The text argues that a war in heaven occurred, resulting in Satan and his demons being entirely cast down from the spiritual realm to the earth.
And the scripture states this results in unprecedented woe for the earth and the sea, right?
Yeah.
Because the devil has come down with great anger, knowing he has a short period of time left.
Yeah, the text frames the modern era as the time of the end. The spiritual tension has literally spilled over into physical reality. Satan's territory has been restricted to our planet, and his operational time is running out.
And the text maps this spiritual anger directly onto physical geopolitics. Like, it references the prophecy in Daniel chapter 11 about an ongoing, exhaustive conflict between two major global entities, the king of the north and the king of the south.
Right. This is where the theological framework attempts to make sense of modern news cycles. The text argues that these aren't static identities. They've shifted throughout history depending on which nations were primarily impacting God's people.
I want to make sure I'm grasping the modern identities of these biblical figures according to the source, because it's a really bold claim. So the king of the north is currently identified as Russia and its allies, and the king of the south is identified as the Anglo-American world power. So, according to this text, the global supremacy battles, the proxy wars, the massive geopolitical posturing we see every single day between these superpowers, these are actually just the physical symptoms of an invisible spiritual pushing.
Yes, the ideological struggles between superpowers aren't viewed simply as human political failures. They are the physical, terrestrial manifestations of a much larger, invisible struggle.
That is wild.
It is. The great anger described in Revelation is the driving engine behind the geopolitical friction described in Daniel. The text treats things like the Cold War, the nuclear arms race, and modern economic sanctions as, well, inevitable symptoms of a confined, angry spirit creature attempting to crash the system before he's prominently removed.
Wow. That is an incredibly heavy lens to view the world through. And if you're looking at this from the outside, I mean, the natural objection is pretty obvious. If human history is a courtroom and God is all-powerful and his name is actively being slandered by this usurper, why let the trial go on for thousands of years?
It's the ultimate question.
Right. Why does God allow the suffering to continue while this legal point is being proven?
Addressing that question is perhaps the most critical function of this narrative. In theology, this is called a theodicy, the vindication of divine goodness in the presence of evil. The text is very deliberate in clearing the Creator's name from the blame for human suffering.
It explicitly pushes back against the idea that God is, testing people with tragedy to see if they'll remain faithful, or punishing them for their sins with natural disasters.
Exactly. The text cites James chapter 1, verse 13, establishing the firm position that with evil things God cannot be tried, nor does he try anyone. The foundational premise is that God is absolutely not the author of today's suffering.
Okay, let's bring in the primary analogy the text uses to explain this, because I love this one, the teacher analogy. I think we really need to kick the tires on it. The text asks you to imagine a classroom where a highly respected teacher is showing the class how to solve a complex equation. And suddenly, a brilliant but rebellious student stands up and claims the teacher is doing it all wrong. The student claims he has a much better way to solve the problem, essentially calling the teacher incompetent and oppressive in front of everyone.
The dilemma for the teacher in that scenario perfectly mirrors the universal challenge raised in Eden.
Right, because the teacher could just use their authority to, kick the student out of the room, but what does that accomplish?
It doesn't prove anything.
Exactly. It leaves a lingering doubt in the minds of the other students. Did the rebellious student actually have a better method? Is the teacher just being an insecure dictator to hide their own flaws? According to the text, the only way to permanently settle the issue for the entire classroom is for the teacher to step back, hand the chalk to the rebellious student, and say, okay, show us.
That decision to hand over the chalk is what the text refers to as the permit of wickedness. God has allowed human self-rule under the invisible influence of Satan to have enough time to definitively demonstrate its own absolute inadequacy.
I get the logic of the analogy, I really do. But here's where it gets difficult for me. Let's say the teacher lets the student take the chalk. But while the student is at the chalkboard fumbling the math, the classroom catches on fire.
The collateral damage.
Yes. The other innocent students are suffering the consequences of this demonstration. And the text cites Jeremiah chapter 10, verse 23, which states, "It doesn't belong to man to direct his own step," meaning humanity doesn't have the capacity for successful self-rule. So if it's doomed to fail from the start, why let the collateral damage pile up for centuries?
Well, the text argues that the stakes of this trial are not limited to just humanity. They encompass the entire spiritual realm as well. The universal class involves billions of spirit creatures who are also observing this precedent.
So it's a much bigger audience than just us.
Exactly. A temporary period of suffering on earth is presented as the necessary burden of proof. It's to establish a permanent, eternal legal precedent that rebellion against divine sovereignty yields disastrous results.
Okay, so if the creator isn't actively causing the fire in the classroom, what is? Because the source material breaks down the actual mechanisms of suffering into three distinct factors.
Yeah, the first factor establishes a baseline of tragedy that isn't rooted in malice, but basically in physics and probability. The text points to Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 11, which notes that time and unforeseen occurrence befall them all.
Meaning sometimes suffering is just the tragic result of being in the wrong place at the wrong time, like a tree falling or a natural disaster or a sudden illness.
Right. It's not a cosmic punishment. It's just the chaotic reality of living in a world temporarily disconnected from divine protection.
Got it. And what about the second factor?
The second factor compounds that baseline. It's inherited imperfection. This links directly back to the concept of the hijacked human race from Eden. The physical decay, genetic diseases, and the inevitability of aging. They are the biological inheritance of that original broken contract.
So humanity is essentially operating on degraded hardware.
That's a great way to put it.
But if accidents and genetics account for the baseline of human suffering, how does the text explain the engineered systemic malice we see in the world? You know, the corruption, the institutional cruelty, the wars.
That requires the third factor, satanic influence. Referencing 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 4, which identifies Satan as the god of this system of things. The text attributes the darkest, most intentional acts of cruelty to the active manipulation of the usurper.
So he's actively making things worse.
He is actively fostering the worst aspects of human nature to prove his point that humans are unredeemable and the Creator's design was flawed.
Wow. Okay, so we've laid out the inciting incident in Eden. We've seen the usurper's strategy of false independence. We've watched the rebellious student struggle at the chalkboard, causing immense suffering through accidents, decay, and direct engineered malice. How does a universal court case of this magnitude finally adjourn?
It concludes with a definitive verdict and a complete structural reset of the earth's management. The text points to the specific mission of Jesus Christ to execute this resolution. According to 1 John chapter 3, verse 8, the Son of God was made manifest for one distinct purpose, to break up the works of the devil.
Break up the works of the devil. I love how direct that is. And the text outlines a highly structured three-stage process for how that dismantling actually occurs, right?
It does. The first stage is Armageddon. Now, in popular culture, Armageddon is usually depicted as a rogue asteroid or a global nuclear holocaust that incinerates the planet.
Right, like an end-of-the-world movie.
But in this theological framework, based on Revelation chapter 16 and chapter 19, Armageddon is a highly targeted political and structural teardown.
Okay, so it's the forceful eviction of the current human and demonic management. The earth itself survives, but the systems governing it are completely dismantled. The rebellious student is finally told to sit down, and the chalk is taken away.
Exactly. Which necessitates the second stage, the abyssing. Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 3, describes Satan being seized, bound, and hurled into an abyss for 1,000 years.
What does the abyss actually mean practically for humanity? Is it just like a theological timeout?
It's the complete removal of his invisible influence. The static of his manipulation is completely shut off. The text describes this 1,000-year period as a necessary grace period.
For a recover.
Right. Humanity needs a millennium free from demonic interference to heal, to rebuild society without systemic corruption, and to be gradually restored to the physical and mental perfection they originally lost in Eden.
So it's a rehabilitation period to undo the damage of the kidnapping, which brings us to the third and final stage. The text refers to this as the real life.
Yes.
Once the works of the devil are completely dismantled and the 1,000 years are complete, the earth returns to its original intended purpose. The text cites Isaiah chapter 33, verse 24, and Revelation chapter 21, verse 4, promising that sickness, war, mourning, and even death itself will be entirely eliminated from the human experience.
And the concept of the real life is the ultimate takeaway for anyone adopting this theological framework. It completely reframes how an individual interprets their present day-to-day existence. How so? Well, if you internalize this narrative, then everything mankind has experienced so far, every historical era, every empire rising and falling, and every ounce of personal suffering, none of it constitutes the actual intended human experience.
It's all just the trial. We are currently living in a temporary, highly volatile transition period. The text references 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 19, urging individuals to get a firm hold on the real life. because the current system is illegitimate and humanity is simply waiting for the usurper to be officially evicted so the creator's sovereignty can be fully restored.
The architecture of this belief system is undeniably comprehensive. I mean, it takes the most painful, chaotic, and seemingly senseless aspects of human existence and assigns them profound legal and moral significance.
It really does.
It offers a framework that insists none of the suffering was in vain. It was all evidence being gathered to settle an eternal dispute.
It challenges the reader to view every news headline, every political summit, and every geopolitical conflict not as random crises, but as direct symptoms of that invisible pushing.
It is a remarkably cohesive way to process the trauma of human history.
Which brings us right back to where we started today. If human history really is a giant pile of puzzle pieces, this text offers a very specific, uncompromising picture on the front of the box to help you put it together.
Beautifully said.
It argues that history is not just a timeline of human achievement. It's a transcript of a failure. And that leaves us with a final, provocative thought for you to mull over today as you look at the news or study history.
I'm curious where you're going with this.
Well, if human history is indeed a trial, a period where mankind has been given the floor, the chalk, and the chalkboard to prove once and for all that it can successfully govern itself, eradicate its own suffering, and thrive without divine guidance, what kind of evidence do you think the last few thousand years of human history has actually submitted to the court?
The answer to that question fundamentally dictates how you view the future.
It really does. Thanks for diving deep with us today. We'll see you next time.